It was supposed to be just another regular night. She'd said, "Couple drinks, then I'll be home." I gave her a nod, barely looking up from my laptop. I was on a tight deadline, and honestly, it wasn't the first time she'd gone out with her friends. Jenny was always spontaneous, the kind of woman who made decisions on a whim. I wasn't about to be the overbearing husband, counting every minute she was out. But that was hours ago. Now, it was past 1 a.m. and my patience was wearing thin. Standing in the kitchen, tapping my fingers against the cool marble countertop, I stared at the clock, watching the minutes stretch painfully. Still no texts. No calls. Not a single word from her. I was irritated. More than irritated. I was on edge. Suddenly, the silence shattered. Her phone rang. I'd almost forgotten she left it charging on the counter. I glanced over. The screen lit up with a name that stopped me cold. Mike? Who the hell was Mike? My gut twisted in ways I couldn't explain. I hovered over the phone, debating. Should I answer? Should I let it go? Curiosity got the better of me, but I didn't pick up. Instead, I watched the phone buzz, letting it ring out. Then came the message. Missed call from Mike. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible. Incredible? My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen as if it was playing some sick joke on me. Before I could even process the gut punch, another message lit up. Is your husband home tonight, or are we on for round 2? Everything inside me exploded. I grabbed my car keys, my mind racing, heart thumping against my ribs so hard it hurt. Fear gripped me, but not the kind of fear you'd expect. This wasn't the terror of the unknown. No, this was worse. The kind of fear that makes you realize you already know what's coming, even before you get the answer. She wasn't with her friends. There was no girls' night out. I was certain of that. And Mike, yeah, I was about to meet him. I threw the front door open, barely feeling the night air hit my skin as I stormed out to my car. Anger boiled in my blood, but there was something darker simmering beneath the surface. Betrayal. The kind that guts you when you're least expecting it. Her phone buzzed again as I sped down the street, and I couldn't help but glance at the screen lighting up beside me. Another message from Mike. You looked amazing in that red dress. Can't wait to tear it off again. Again? I nearly slammed on the brakes as rage ripped through me. I didn't have a plan. I just needed answers. There was one place she could be, though. She'd mentioned it once in passing, a dive bar her friend liked to go to. The Rusty Nail. That had to be it. And if Mike was there, well, he was about to get a lot more than he bargained for. I drove like a madman, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My mind was spinning, replaying every moment from the last few months, trying to find where it all went wrong. How long had I been blind to this? Was I stupid to trust her? Or did I just not want to see the truth? The Rusty Nail loomed ahead, its flickering neon sign casting an eerie glow in the empty parking lot. The kind of place that looked sleazy even on a good night. It wasn't a place Jenny should have been, but then again, maybe I didn't know her as well as I thought. Her car was there, parked in the far back, tucked away like she didn't want anyone to see it. A lump of cold dread settled in my stomach, heavier than the rage that had been fueling me. But I was already here, and there was no going back now. I stepped out of the car, the night air cold against my skin, but I barely felt it. My heart was pounding in my ears, louder than the muffled music seeping out from the bar. I could see the silhouettes of people inside, bodies moving, the sound of muffled laughter carried by the wind. Somewhere in there was Jenny. And Mike. I pushed through the front door, the stench of spilled beer and cheap perfume hitting me like a wall. The place was packed, but it all blurred together. Faces, voices, the pounding bass of music. It didn't matter. I was on a mission, and my eyes were locked on the bar. And then I saw her. She was sitting on a stool, her back turned to me, laughing. And beside her, leaning in too close, was him. Mike. His hand rested on her thigh like he owned her, and she didn't even flinch. It was as if I wasn't even a thought in her mind. My whole world shattered in that moment. I stormed through the crowd, shoving people out of my way, my fists clenched at my sides, each step fueled by a fury I didn't know I was capable of. Jenny didn't see me coming, too caught up in whatever joke Mike was telling her. Her fingers grazed his arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. Who the hell was she? Without thinking, my hand landed on her shoulder, spinning her around with a force that made her gasp. Her face froze in shock, wide-eyed like a deer caught in headlights, and for the first time, she looked at me. Really looked at me. But it wasn't fear in her eyes. No, it was something else, something worse. Annoyance. "Jason," she said, as if I had just interrupted something as innocent as a casual conversation between friends. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I spat the words out, louder than I intended. Heads turned, but I didn't care. I felt a burning in my chest, an uncontrollable rage I couldn't contain. Who the hell is this? Mike just sat there, his lips curling into the smuggest grin I'd ever seen. He didn't even have the decency to move his hand from her leg. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His cocky smile said it all. He'd already won, at least in his mind. Jenny's eyes flicked to Mike, then back to me. "Jason, calm down. It's not what you think." Her voice was cold, a sharp contrast to the fake innocence she was trying to pull off. "Mike's just a friend. We're just talking." "Friend?" My whole body tensed. "A friend?" I couldn't help the bitterness that crept into my voice. "Is that what you call it? And what about those texts? Last night was incredible? You think I'm that stupid?" For the briefest second, her facade cracked. I saw it, the flicker of guilt, or maybe shame, but it vanished just as quickly. Her lips curled into that same condescending smirk she used when she thought she was winning an argument. "Jesus, Jason, you're being ridiculous. Stop embarrassing yourself." "Embarrassing myself?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized something terrifying. This wasn't the woman I married. This wasn't the woman I'd spent 6 years building a life with. This was a stranger sitting in front of me, smirking like she couldn't care less about the wreckage she was leaving behind. Mike finally spoke up, leaning back in his chair, his smirk deepening. "Relax, man. It's not what you think." My fists clenched at my sides. The urge to hit him, to wipe that smug look off his face, surged through me like wildfire. But Jenny stood up, stepping between us before I could do anything. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but there was no kindness in it, just cold, hard truth. "Jason," she said, crossing her arms, "this is not your business anymore." Her words cut deeper than any punch ever could. I stood there, frozen. Her words rang in my ears, but they felt distant, like they were coming from someplace far away. Not my business anymore. The woman I had shared my life with, my home, my bed, was telling me this wasn't my business? My entire world was tilting, and I couldn't find my footing. I took a breath, trying to control the storm brewing inside me, but it was no use. The anger surged like a tidal wave. My fists clenched and unclenched at my sides, trembling from the effort of keeping them at bay. Mike was still sitting there, looking between us like this was some twisted entertainment. And Jenny, she stood there, arms crossed, face calm, like she had already moved on. I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "How long, Jenny? How long has this been going on?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes flicked toward the floor, as if she were debating how much of the truth to give me. And then, in the most casual tone, she shrugged. "Does it really matter?" That was it. The moment everything shattered. All the love, the trust, the years we had built together. They crumbled in an instant. Months, maybe years of suspicion came crashing down, and in its place was a gaping void of betrayal. My voice was barely a whisper when I spoke again. "I want the truth." Jenny rolled her eyes, her lips curling into that familiar smirk that now made my skin crawl. "You really want to do this here?" she asked, gesturing around the bar. "In front of all these people?" "I don't care about them," I snapped. "I care about you telling me how long you've been lying to me. How long you've been sneaking around behind my back." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe regret, but it vanished as quickly as it came. She crossed her arms, her voice cold, detached. "Fine. You want the truth, Jason? It's been months. Months." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The air rushed out of my lungs, and my vision blurred as the weight of her words sank in. I had been living a lie for months. While I was at home, trusting her, she was here with him. Why? The words slipped out before I could stop it, and suddenly, I felt pathetic for even asking. But I needed to know. I needed to understand how the woman I thought I knew had become a stranger in front of my eyes. Why would you do this? Jenny sighed, like she was bored of the conversation already. You're too easy, Jason, she said, her voice dripping with indifference. Too predictable. You're always working, always so focused on your deadlines, your job, your life. I needed something exciting. That word, exciting, hit harder than anything else. All the late nights she claimed to be with friends, all the excuses she gave. And it was because I wasn't enough. I wasn't exciting enough for her. I stared at her, my heart pounding, my throat tight. Exciting? I echoed, my voice hollow. So you destroy our marriage for excitement? You throw everything away for this? I gestured toward Mike, who was still sitting there, barely suppressing a smirk. The smug bastard didn't even try to hide the satisfaction on his face. He had one. He had taken her from me, and now he was just watching the fallout, amused by the destruction. Jenny didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look ashamed. Instead, she shrugged again, her expression cold and detached. It's not about ruining anything, Jason. It just happened. Just happened? My whole body was trembling now, the rage bubbling up again, threatening to explode. It just happened? I repeated, incredulous. You don't just accidentally cheat on your husband, Jenny. You don't just fall into bed with someone else. But she wasn't listening anymore. She was done with me, and it was clear as day. There was no remorse, no apology, no regret. She had made her choice, and I was no longer a part of it. I was just an inconvenience now, standing in the way of her new life with Mike. Mike, who was still sitting there, as if he belonged in this conversation, as if he had any right to be here. My fists clenched again, and before I could stop myself, I lunged at him. The punch landed hard. My fist connected with his jaw, and the sound of it, flesh hitting bone, was like a gunshot in the bar. He stumbled back, crashing into the stool behind him, the smug grin wiped clean off his face. Jenny screamed, but I barely heard it. All I could see was red. Mike staggered to his feet, wiping blood from his split lip, glaring at me with a mix of shock and fury. I half expected him to fight back, to throw a punch of his own, but instead, he just laughed. A low, mocking chuckle that sent a chill down my spine. Really, man, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Over her? She's not worth it. Those words hit me harder than the punch. Not worth it. My wife, the woman I had devoted years of my life to, wasn't worth it. I stared at him, my fist still clenched, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I looked at her. Jenny stood there, arms crossed, her face twisted into that infuriatingly calm expression. She wasn't scared. She wasn't even angry. She was just annoyed. Annoyed that I was ruining her night. I felt something inside me break. I stood there, fists still clenched, chest heaving, and for the first time, I saw everything clearly. All the nights I had spent waiting up for her, the dinners I cooked that went cold, the plans I had made that she never cared about, they were all meaningless. Every single moment was shattered by the reality that had been staring me in the face this whole time, but I had been too blind to see it. Jenny didn't love me. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the bar on me, waiting to see what I would do next. But the fight was draining out of me, replaced by a suffocating sense of betrayal and humiliation. How did I end up here? How did my life, my marriage, turn into this? Tell me the truth, Jenny, I said, my voice low, trembling with a mixture of anger and something worse, desperation. I needed to hear it from her. I needed her to admit it. How long has this been going on? She hesitated, and for a second, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. But then she straightened, her expression hardening, and the cold, detached mask slipped back into place. Does it really matter, Jason? She said, her voice icy. You want the truth? Fine. It's been months. Months of this. Her words hit me like a freight train. I felt the ground fall out from under me, my entire world crumbling in an instant. Months. While I was at home, thinking she was working late or out with friends, she was here, with him. My stomach churned, a bitter taste rising in my throat. Why? The word escaped before I could stop it. I hated myself for asking, hated the weakness in my voice, but I couldn't stop. Why would you do this? She sighed. Rolling her eyes like this was just another boring conversation she wanted to get through. You want to know why? Because I was bored, Jason. I was bored of the routine, bored of you, bored. The words sliced through me, sharper than any blade. I stood there, staring at her, trying to comprehend what she was saying. This wasn't just about a fling. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. She was telling me that I had become a burden to her. Our entire life together, everything we had built, had become a bore. I swallowed hard, trying to keep the tremble out of my voice. Bored? I echoed. So you threw everything away for excitement? For this? I gestured to Mike, who was standing off to the side, watching the scene unfold with a smug grin still plastered on his face. His lip was bleeding from where I'd hit him, but he didn't seem to care. He was loving this. He had already won. Jenny shrugged, completely unfazed by the devastation in front of her. It's not about throwing anything away, Jason. It's not like I planned this. It just happened. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind was spinning, struggling to process how cold, how completely indifferent she was being. I had given her everything, my time, my trust, my love, and this was what it came down to. You're unbelievable, I muttered, more to myself than to her. You ruin our marriage for a cheap thrill, and you're acting like it's no big deal. Jenny rolled her eyes again, crossing her arms. God, Jason, you're so dramatic. This doesn't have to be the end of the world, you know? Not the end of the world? I stared at her, unable to comprehend how she could say that, how she could stand there, completely unfazed, while my entire life was crumbling around me. You're right, I said, my voice cold now, all the warmth and emotion drained out of it. It's not the end of the world. It's just the end of us. For the first time, something flickered across her face. Maybe she hadn't expected me to say it. Maybe she thought this was just another fight, something we'd get past. But I wasn't going to get past this. There was no coming back from what she had done. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I felt nothing. Not the love I had once felt. Not the pain or the anger that had been consuming me. Just nothing. You want excitement, Jenny? I said, my voice steady now, calm in a way that surprised even me. Fine. Have it. I'm done. I turned on my heel, walking away from her, from Mike, from the wreckage of what had once been my life. My fists were still clenched, but the rage that had been fueling me was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. As I reached the door, I heard Jenny call after me. Jason, stop. Don't do this. I paused, my hand on the door, but I didn't turn around. It's already done. Without another word, I pushed the door open and walked out into the night. The cold air hit my face, but I barely felt it. My mind was numb, my body running on autopilot as I made my way to my car. I had just walked away from my marriage. 6 years, gone in the span of a single night. I had no idea what to do next, where to go, what my life was supposed to be now. All I knew was that I couldn't stay here. Not anymore. I slammed the car door behind me, the sound cutting through the stillness of the night. Sitting there, in the driver's seat, everything came crashing down at once. The adrenaline that had been pushing me forward all night was gone, leaving me with a hollow emptiness. The weight of what had just happened hit me like a sledgehammer. I had left her. I had actually walked away from the life we built. And she hadn't even fought for it. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I stared at the dashboard, my vision blurring as 1,000 thoughts raced through my head. How had it come to this? How had I let everything slip away without even realizing it? For months, maybe even years, she had been drifting. The late nights, the distant look in her eyes, the casual lies that I had brushed off as nothing. I had convinced myself that it was just a phase, that we would find our way back to each other. But the truth was staring me in the face now, undeniable and brutal. She didn't love me anymore. Maybe she never had. I could still feel the sting of her words, the coldness in her voice when she said I was boring, that she needed something more exciting. I had given her everything I had, and it wasn't enough. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, snapping me out of my spiral. I glanced down, and there it was, a message from Jenny. For a second, I felt a flicker of hope, as stupid as that was. Maybe she was going to apologize. Maybe she realized she had made a mistake. But no, the message was short, cold, like everything else that had come from her tonight. You're overreacting. We could have worked this out. Maybe if you tried harder, I wouldn't have needed Mike. I stared at the screen, the words blurring in front of me. Overreacting? She was still blaming me. Even now, after everything, she was making this my fault. The anger surged again, hot and fierce, but this time it was different. This time it wasn't just about her betrayal. It was about me, about how I had let this happen, how I had been too blind, too trusting, too stupid to see what was right in front of me. My fingers trembled as I typed out a response. You're unbelievable. Don't text me again. I hit send, tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, and finally started the car. The engine roared to life, but I sat there for a moment, letting the sound drown out the chaos in my head. Then I pulled out of the parking lot, the streetlights blurring as I sped down the road, not caring where I was going. I just needed to get away. From her, from that bar, from everything. The city passed by in a blur, dark and empty, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of the loneliness that was closing in around me. What now? I had no idea. Everything I thought I knew about my life had been torn apart in a matter of hours. I had no home to go back to, no wife waiting for me, nothing but a mess I didn't know how to clean up. I drove aimlessly, the streets all looking the same. My mind was racing, replaying every moment from that night over and over again, like some twisted movie I couldn't shut off. Her face, her voice, the way she had looked at me like I was the problem, like I was the one who had destroyed us. Bored, predictable, not enough. Her words echoed in my head, cutting deeper with every repetition. How had I been so blind? All the signs were there. Her late nights, the distance, the sudden excuses about girls' nights and work events that never quite made sense. I had wanted so badly to believe her, to trust her, that I ignored everything that didn't fit the picture I had in my head of our marriage. I had told myself it was just a rough patch, that we'd get through it. But the truth was, we had been falling apart for a long time, and I hadn't even noticed. I barely registered where I was going until I pulled into an empty parking lot, the tires screeching slightly as I came to an abrupt stop. I slammed the car into park and just sat there, gripping the wheel until my arms ached. My heart was racing, my mind spinning out of control. What the hell had just happened to my life? I couldn't hold it in anymore. The anger, the pain, the humiliation. It all came crashing down at once, suffocating me. Before I knew it, I was punching the steering wheel, each hit sending a shockwave through my body. I screamed, the sound ripping out of my throat, raw and primal, as I slammed my fists over and over. But no matter how hard I hit, it didn't change anything. Nothing could undo the damage that had been done. Nothing could fix the wreckage of my life. Eventually, I collapsed against the steering wheel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The tears came, silent at first, then harder, faster, until they were shaking my entire body. I had never felt so broken, so completely and utterly alone. All the love, all the trust, all the years I had spent building a life with her, it was all gone. And for what? For excitement. I sat there for what felt like hours, the tears finally drying up, but the pain still gnawing at me from the inside. I didn't want to cry anymore. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing how much she had broken me. But I couldn't stop the hollow ache in my chest, the feeling of loss so deep it was like a black hole had opened up inside me. She didn't love me. She never had. All those nights I stayed up late, thinking she was working or out with friends, she was with him. All the moments I thought we were building something real, something lasting, she was tearing it apart behind my back. I was a fool. And now, I was alone. I stayed there in that parking lot for what felt like hours, head pressed against the steering wheel, the engine still idling. The anger had drained out of me, leaving only the cold, hard truth. This wasn't a nightmare I could wake up from. This was real. The life I thought I had, the marriage I thought I could count on, was gone. She had chosen excitement over us. Over me. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, my fingers trembling. The tears had stopped, but the pain lingered like a knife twisting in my gut, constant and unforgiving. I couldn't keep sitting here, couldn't keep replaying her words in my head, over and over, trying to make sense of something that would never make sense. With a deep breath, I turned off the engine. The silence that followed was deafening, like the world had stopped spinning. I was exhausted, my whole body aching from the tension, but I knew I couldn't just sit there all night. I had to move. I had to do something. Anything. I pulled out my phone, staring at the screen for a long moment, the bright light harsh against my tired eyes. There were a few missed calls from work, a couple of notifications, but nothing that mattered. Nothing that could distract me from the mess I was in. Then I remembered. My lawyer. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. Divorce. The word echoed in my mind, cold and final. It was the only option, the only way forward. There was no fixing this. No going back. Jenny had made her choice, and I had to make mine. I scrolled through my contacts, finding my lawyer's number, my thumb hovering over the screen for a moment. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. We were supposed to grow old together, supposed to fight through the rough patches and come out stronger. But that was a fantasy, wasn't it? The truth was, our marriage had been dying for a long time, and I had been too blind, or too hopeful, to see it. With a deep breath, I pressed the call button. It rang a few times before going to voicemail. Of course, it was late, but that didn't matter. I knew what I had to say. "Hey, it's Jason," I began, my voice low and steady, though inside, I was anything but calm. "I need to start the paperwork. Jenny cheated on me. It's over. I'll come by the office tomorrow, but I wanted to get this moving as soon as possible." I hung up, my hand shaking as I set the phone down. There. It was done. The first step toward the end. But as much as I tried to feel some kind of relief, all I felt was emptiness. A cold, hollow ache that settled deep in my chest, making it hard to breathe. 6 years. 6 years of my life, gone in a matter of minutes. How was I supposed to move forward from this? How was I supposed to rebuild when everything I thought I had was gone? My phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with a new message. My heart sank as I saw her name, Jenny. For a second, I thought about ignoring it. I didn't want to hear anything else from her, didn't want to read more of her excuses, her lies. But something inside me, some small, masochistic part, compelled me to open it. "Come home, Jason. We need to talk. I didn't mean for things to go like this. We can figure this out, okay?" I stared at the message, my hands trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. She still didn't get it. She still thought this was something we could fix. Like this was just some minor bump in the road, something we could smooth over with a conversation. But there was no fixing this. There was no talking our way out of it. She had ripped us apart, and no amount of sweet words or half-hearted apologies could change that. I typed back, my fingers shaking with fury. "It's already figured out. I'll be sending the divorce papers soon. Don't bother coming home." I hit send and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, the finality of it washing over me like a wave. It was over. Really, truly over. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt something close to clarity. I had been fighting for something that didn't exist anymore. Jenny wasn't the woman I had married. Maybe she never had been. Maybe I had been chasing a version of her that only existed in my mind, and I had been too stubborn to see the truth. But now, I saw it, and as painful as it was, there was a strange sense of relief in the acceptance. I wasn't going to fight anymore. I wasn't going to beg or scream or try to make her see what she had done. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. The drive back to the house was quieter than before. No more rage, no more panic, just the dull ache of finality settling in. The streets were empty, the city asleep, and for the first time, I felt like I was seeing everything clearly. I wasn't that guy anymore. The guy who waited up for his wife. The guy who made excuses for her. The guy who let himself believe that everything would be okay. That guy was gone. When I pulled up to the house, the weight of it all hit me again. This wasn't my home anymore. It was just a place filled with memories, ghosts of what we used to be. I didn't belong here, not anymore. But I had to go inside. I had to pack. I had to leave. I stepped through the door, the silence inside thick and suffocating. The lights were off, the house dark, but I didn't bother turning them on. I knew this place by heart, and I wasn't planning on staying long. I grabbed a suitcase from the closet, moving through the house in a daze, throwing clothes and essentials into the bag without much thought. I didn't care if I forgot something. I didn't care about any of it anymore. Everything in this house was just a reminder of what I had lost, and I wanted nothing to do with it. As I moved through the bedroom, my eyes landed on the framed photos of us, smiling, happy, a picture-perfect couple. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. What a joke. I had been living in a fantasy, a carefully constructed lie, and I hadn't even seen it. I pulled the frames off the wall, tossing them aside without a second thought. They didn't mean anything now. In the kitchen, her phone was still sitting on the counter, charging like it had been when I left. I stared at it for a long moment, tempted to smash it, to destroy the thing that had brought me to this moment. But I didn't touch it. She would come home and find it. She would know that everything she thought she had control over was slipping through her fingers. Before I walked out the door, I grabbed a piece of paper and a pen from the counter, scribbling 2 words that said everything I needed to say. It's over. I left the note next to her phone and walked out the door, not bothering to look back. I drove through the night, the road stretching out before me like an endless ribbon, leading nowhere. The air was cool, almost crisp, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could actually breathe. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for months, maybe even years, was finally lifting. Slowly. It wasn't gone, not yet, but it was lighter. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. All I knew was that I was free, free from the lies, from the betrayal, from the life I thought I wanted but had never truly had. I wasn't the same man who had stormed into that bar hours ago, blinded by anger and humiliation. That man was gone. What was left was something new, something raw and broken, but also something real. My phone buzzed again on the passenger seat. I didn't even glance at it this time. I knew it was her. I knew she would be trying to reach me, trying to explain, to manipulate, to say whatever she thought I needed to hear to make me come back. But there was nothing left to say, nothing left to hear. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. As I drove, I couldn't help but think back over the past few years. The cracks had been there for a long time, hadn't they? But I hadn't wanted to see them. I had ignored the little things, the late nights at work, the weekends she spent with friends, the distance that had grown between us like a canyon I couldn't cross. I had convinced myself that we were just going through a rough patch, that we would find our way back to each other. I had wanted so badly to believe in the fantasy of us, that I had ignored the reality that was staring me in the face. The truth was, I had been in denial. I had been chasing a dream that didn't exist anymore. Maybe it never had. Jenny wasn't the woman I had thought she was. Or maybe I wasn't the man she had wanted. It didn't matter anymore. All that mattered now was that it was over. And in a strange, twisted way, that felt like a relief. The road ahead was empty, the city behind me shrinking into the distance. I had no idea where I was going, maybe a hotel, maybe a friend's couch, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the pressure to know. I didn't feel the suffocating need to have everything figured out. There was no more pretending, no more holding on to something that wasn't there. I was alone, and that was okay. I pulled into the parking lot of a small roadside motel, the kind of place that looked like it hadn't changed in decades. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting a dim glow over the lot, but I didn't care. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I parked the car, grabbed my suitcase from the back seat, and headed toward the entrance, the gravel crunching under my feet with each step. The woman at the front desk barely glanced at me as I paid for the room, sliding the key across the counter with a bored expression. I thanked her, even though she didn't acknowledge it, and made my way to the room at the far end of the lot. The room was small, musty, with faded floral wallpaper and a bed that sagged in the middle. But it didn't matter. I wasn't here for comfort. I just needed a place to crash, to clear my head, to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I tossed my suitcase on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the worn carpet beneath my feet. The silence in the room was deafening, but it didn't bother me. In fact, it felt almost comforting. The chaos of the night was finally behind me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't drowning in it. I leaned back against the headboard, staring up at the cracked ceiling, my mind buzzing with thoughts I couldn't quite control. What now? What was I supposed to do with this new life? This life that had been ripped apart and handed back to me in pieces. I didn't have the answer. I wasn't sure I ever would. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't go back. Not to her. Not to the life we had shared. That chapter of my life was over, and it was time to turn the page. But what came next? The exhaustion was finally catching up to me. My eyes felt heavy, my body aching from the weight of everything that had happened. I pulled out my phone one last time, staring at the screen, at the messages from Jenny that I hadn't bothered to open. She was still trying to get through to me, still trying to explain, to salvage whatever she thought could be saved. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. There was nothing left to save. I opened her latest message, not because I cared what she had to say, but because I wanted closure. I wanted to see it with my own eyes, the final nail in the coffin of what we used to be. Jason, please. Let's talk. We can fix this. I made a mistake, but it doesn't have to end like this. Please come home. Home. The word felt foreign to me now. That house wasn't my home anymore. It was just a place filled with memories that didn't mean anything. I typed back, my fingers steady, my heart surprisingly calm. It's already over, Jenny. I'll send the papers. Don't contact me again. I hit send and tossed the phone onto the nightstand. The weight of the conversation finally lifted off my shoulders. It was done. It was really, truly done. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The morning sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of the motel room, casting long shadows across the bed. I hadn't slept much, but for the first time in a long time, the restlessness wasn't consuming me. I felt lighter. The storm had passed, and what was left was the quiet aftermath, the strange calm that settles in after the worst is over. I sat up, stretching my stiff limbs, and glanced around the room. It wasn't much to look at, but it was mine, at least for the moment. A far cry from the life I had been living, but maybe that was the point. I needed something new, something different. The man I had been before last night didn't exist anymore. I wasn't defined by her, by what she did to me. I had a choice now, a chance to rebuild, to start over. But the road ahead was still blurry. I didn't have a clear direction, and that was okay. For the first time, I wasn't rushing to figure it all out. I wasn't clinging to the idea that I had to have all the answers right away. Life didn't work like that, no matter how much I had tried to convince myself otherwise. I had learned that the hard way. After showering and grabbing a cup of bad coffee from the motel lobby, I found myself sitting in the parking lot, staring at the road. The sun was climbing higher in the sky, and the day stretched out before me, full of possibility. The weight that had been sitting on my chest for so long had lifted, replaced by something unfamiliar. Hope. I knew I couldn't stay here forever. This motel, this limbo, was just a stopover. There was still a life waiting for me somewhere out there. But this time, it was a life I could shape on my own terms. No more chasing after someone who didn't want me. No more pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I had a clean slate, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what that meant. I pulled out my phone, glancing at the messages from friends and family that I had ignored over the last few weeks. I hadn't told anyone yet, hadn't even begun to explain what had happened. But I knew I needed to. I wasn't going to hide from the truth anymore. I wasn't going to keep pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. I had nothing to be ashamed of. Jenny's betrayal wasn't my fault, and it wasn't going to define me. With a deep breath, I dialed my lawyer again, setting up a time to meet later that week. The conversation was brief, but as soon as I hung up, I felt another weight lift. The papers would be filed, and this chapter of my life would be officially over. There was still a long road ahead. Divorce wasn't going to be easy, and the emotional scars would take time to heal, but at least I was moving forward. I was taking control of my life again. I sat there for a while longer, sipping my coffee, letting the morning air wake me up. I hadn't realized how exhausted I had been until now. The months of tension, of suspicion, of trying to hold together a marriage that was already crumbling. It had drained me. But now, I could breathe again. The phone buzzed once more, and I glanced down. It wasn't from Jenny this time. It was my brother, asking how I was, saying he hadn't heard from me in a while and wanted to catch up. For the first time, I didn't hesitate. I hit the call button and pressed the phone to my ear. "Hey, man," I said, my voice sounding lighter than it had in months. "Jason, finally. I've been trying to get a hold of you. Everything okay?" His voice was warm, full of concern, but not pity. I appreciated that. I took a breath. "Actually, no, but it's going to be. There's a lot I need to tell you." He listened as I explained what had happened, as I laid out the mess that had become my life over the past few months. There were pauses on his end, moments of silence where I knew he was trying to find the right words. But in the end, he didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. He just listened. "Damn, Jason," he said finally. "I don't even know what to say. That's rough, man. But I'm glad you're out of it. You deserve better than that." "Yeah," I said, feeling the truth of his words sink in. "I guess I do." "Listen," he continued, his voice brighter now. "Why don't you come stay with me for a bit? Get out of there. Clear your head. We'll go grab a beer. Hit the beach, whatever. Just don't be alone, all right?" I smiled, the first real smile I'd had in a long time. "That sounds good. Really good. All right then. It's settled. Pack your bags and get your ass down here. We'll get you back on your feet." The call ended, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of direction. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I didn't have to figure it all out alone. I had people who cared about me, who would help me through this, even when I couldn't see the way forward. I grabbed my suitcase, tossing it into the trunk, and slid into the driver's seat. The road stretched out before me again, but this time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like an opportunity, a chance to rebuild, to rediscover who I was without the weight of a broken marriage hanging over me. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The motel faded into the distance, a symbol of the past I was leaving behind. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I drove toward the horizon, the sun climbing higher in the sky, my heart lighter with every mile. Whatever came next, I was ready for it. I was stronger than the pain, stronger than the betrayal. I had survived the storm, and now it was time to rebuild. I wasn't the man who had walked into that bar anymore. I was someone new, someone free, and for the first time in months, I was at peace.